So today I'm here with Toby Adams. So Toby is the head of research for WA and nationally for UDIA. For those that don't know, the UDIA is the Urban Development Institute of Australia, and they work with developers, landholders, and more broadly, the entire development industry to lobby government and produce reports and information and just help us to get a better understanding of what's happening in the development industry. So I wanted to ask Toby a few questions. Thanks for joining us, Toby. You've recently put out the National Housing Pipeline Report. Can you give us an understanding of what that is?
Right, yeah, thanks, Tim, and hello to your listeners and viewers. The National Housing Pipeline is one of our UDIA national kind of research beachhead sort of projects, if you like. And the idea to go back and provide a bit of context sort of germinated in late 21, early 2022, when particularly in WA, but a similar sort of issue was identified across all of the states and territories, is a significant disconnect between what government, official state government or territory government land monitoring and land forecasting programs were suggesting was the state of play in terms of zoned and available land supply versus what industry developers on the ground were experiencing in terms of access to development ready land. I mean, being zoned is one thing, which is obviously critical to the development process, but the land also needs to be appropriately serviced with enabling infrastructure and have the requisite approvals in place. And so the idea was cooked up to produce a nationally consistent approach across each of the UDIA state offices to measure land supply. And we're not just land supply as a concept, I think, is a fairly contested term, and it's very contextual and depends, what you mean by that. In the case of the NHP, the National Housing Pipeline, what we're talking about is real or actual land supply, which can be realised for development. So part of that assessment needs to exclude land that can't be developed for various reasons due to environmental or infrastructure buffer kind of types of constraints. So we wanted to remove land from land supply pipeline reporting that was unable to be developed, but also put a lot more accuracy around when new housing product is likely to be developed on various land parcels across each capital city and each growth corridor. And right from the outset, we were very clear on wanting the NHP not just to be a greenfield land supply monitor. It has definitely got the whole of market, so the infill and the apartment sector covered as well, albeit that is one of the areas we're looking to strengthen into this year's program, which is into its third year. So in 2023, we conducted the inaugural NHP pilot here in Perth and Peel. That was launched in November of that year, and then using those learnings and the established program, we rolled that out across the country in 2024, and then released our inaugural national pilot report in November of last year, and was very well received across our membership base, but also being well regarded by critical stakeholders across industry, both at the federal, state and local government levels, which is terrific. Right from the outset, Tim, we were very keen for this not just to be kind of a UDIA black box kind of program. We wanted it to be right from the outset very transparent and very collaborative, drawing upon government data as much as possible and as much as it's available, but also supplementing that with rich industry insights and industry data sets. That's sort of in a nutshell the NHP, and as I say, we're very excited about its impact it's already had in the national pilot last year, and there's a lot of interest from government authorities such as the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council's Secretariat, who support that new body within Housing Australia to inform their state of the housing system reporting. So and that cascades all the way down to other bodies like the Australian Bureau of Stats, who are interested in our survey model and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And so in the report, it outlined that there was around 9,000 hectares of undeveloped residential zoned land throughout Greater Perth. Are you able to give us an understanding of kind of where that sits primarily?
Yeah, and so that's sort of a key figure that we update every year through our development constraints and land supply mapping program, and we work with MNG as our key geospatial consultant on that work here in Perth, but also in Melbourne. In terms of the spatial location of that undeveloped urban zone land, and so in this instance, we're talking about a land that is zone urban within the metropolitan region scheme, but it's also got a local planning scheme, residential development overlay, and or an R code. So it is sort of trying to carve out land that is genuinely sort of earmarked for residential development, not other types of land use like commercial, industrial, etc. So the northwest sector, principally Wanneroo, there's virtually no MRS urban zone land left in Joondalup in the northwest, is a key locus for undeveloped urban. Probably not the depth of supply in Swan that we might expect. Indeed, there's probably more of the urban investigation, urban expansion lands up there in Swan, and that's probably going to be a bit of a focus for expediting that process of conversion to urban deferred and urban for locations such as North Ellenbrook and Bullsbrook, to realise their sort of yields. We've also got a significant amount of undeveloped urban in Gosnells at the LGA scale. The Shire of Murray has a reasonable amount of undeveloped urban as well, but Serpentine Jarrahdale is another location with significant amount of undeveloped urban and some urban deferred as well. So it's a reasonable spread across the corridors. We feel like there's probably significant supply of volumes in the northwest. It's probably more the northeast and probably the southwest where the aggregates undeveloped urban zone land is looking lighter on in the pipeline than probably ideal for a balanced market position.
And that would then feed off the back of all the improved road networks out there with Tonkin, Reed, Roe, etc. Great Eastern Highway as well. So then you've said that in the report that there's around 16,000 hectares of unconstrained potential future zone resi land. Where generally is that? Are those in similar locations?
Yeah, well, there's much less in Wanneroo. There's a significant amount in Swan. So Swan, Murray, and Serpentine Jarrahdale are the major locations for those expansion areas, and in many ways that they make sense for those expansion of the existing corridors. The reality is that the mapping of the greenfield expansion and opportunities probably a bit easier than the infill locations in terms of putting them into a tiered pipeline. And we've had a couple of cycles now of trying to prove up, I suppose, the amount of supply that could be developed over the next 10 years. And that's sort of a key point to emphasise that we're looking at a 10-year pipeline here, which is important because one of the challenges that a lot of developers face who are looking to bring on undeveloped land portions of their portfolio is often the servicing agencies, namely Western Power and Water Corporation, only work to a 5-year capital works program. So anything beyond 5 years and anything that's not zoned urban isn't prioritised and isn't considered as part of their 5-year work block. So where there's locations like Bullsbrook and North Ellenbrook, which sort of in that camp, they're maybe not zoned appropriately yet, but there's expectation that there's going to be development there within the sort of the medium term. The development industry's challenge with working within the strictures of some of these service agencies that are critical, obviously, to realising new dwelling supply and by extension for a lot of the audience, I suppose, new town centres and commercial nodes. So that's a clarion focus, and a key reason why we're undertaking this program in the first instance is to be able to gather that evidence on behalf of the industry and highlight to government where there's blockages or there's issues in terms of the sequencing and timing of new infrastructure for supply. And I guess that's a useful thing to point out is in our reporting, we distinguish between a development constraint, which is in our vernacular an environmental or an infrastructure buffer constraint, versus a challenge. And an infrastructure servicing matter would be more of a challenge because ultimately a timing and funding issue doesn't mean that it can't ever be developed. It's just about when it can be developed and if that's in an efficient and timely manner. So yeah, there's a few sort of lenses that we put on the data, and that's also reflects the way in which we collect the information and what we're collecting through 3 major sort of intelligence gathering exercises. The first being the development constraints and land supply mapping exercise, which is very much a top-down macro analysis, a traditional GIS div mapping exercise, if you like, where we get base layers of zone and potential future zoned areas. Then we overlay 14 different fundamental constraint layers, and then an additional 3 layers which comprise additional constraints to development, which topically, I'm not sure if you've covered this in your pod series around the challenges for Bush Forever and environmental assets through threatened ecological communities, which in our mapping has been focused on remnant Chewett and Bankshire woodland. So if there's any of that habitat or that vegetation on a development site, that's going to create some challenges for the developer. How that's resolved in terms of maintaining that canopy or offsetting it is obviously a case-by-case basis, but we consider that an additional constraint. So anyways, it's a very detailed and very granular approach to assessing land supply and assessing what's actually available once all those constraints have been considered and discarded.
And then, so you said in the report that 29% of the land is constrained. If we look at both, say, constrained and challenged land, what are the main key issues that keep coming up, and what's the low-hanging fruit in terms of what we can do to get developments moving in those areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, environmental constraints are probably the major one within undeveloped urban areas and indeed across urban deferred, urban expansion, urban investigation. The environmental categories are pretty broad as they cover things like wetlands and waterways, include bush forever sites, environmental protection policy areas, and floodways. They're sort of the major ones, and out of that, it's a fairly environmental protection policy is fairly marginal, but the rest are fairly equal in terms of their land takes. It's actually quite interesting doing this exercise in each capital city and the differences that the planning systems approach the zoning program and the process. So, for instance, I was talking to colleagues in Adelaide yesterday about their refresh of their mapping, and their view is that the government has got their own land supply monitor program, and everything that they're putting up there has already had a lot of the constraints carved out before it's actually zoned and apportioned, which you'd expect would be the case in other locations, but it's not always. There's generally a broad designation of urban MRS urban zoning in Perth, and then the more detailed planning happens at the local structure plan and local and obviously the district structure plan scales, which we don't have the best of data, digital data coverage with the district structure plan. So through your network, Tim, if anyone has got a complete collection of DSPs that they'd like to share with UDIA for this program, just reach out. We'd be only too happy to have a chat.
Sure. So then in the report, there was 9 recommendations. So how, and that was put forward to the state government or to the governments last year. How do you think they responded as part of their recent election campaign? And what about the federal governments as well?
Yeah, look, it's a very interesting time to be involved in housing anywhere across the country. That's fair to say, and it's probably had housing's going to feature very heavily, as it's already started to in this current federal election campaign. In terms of the local reception to the report, we've been pretty blessed, I suppose, is the best word, in terms of the access and the interest in the program from right from the Minister for Planning and Housing through the different layers of DPLH and including the Office of Housing Supply, and we've been working quite closely with them, providing data from our NHP to support some of the work that office is undertaking. Specifically around the investment in infrastructure, at the right time, has been a fairly well received ask, I suppose, and there's been various moves from state government to move towards the growth areas catalytic infrastructure fund idea, and indeed I think our policy team here would claim that as a win. There's certainly been a broad push towards looking at initiatives that can help with the housing diversity pipeline and ensuring there's a good range of typologies that are coming through, both state government-led and joint ventured projects, as well as through facilitated means across the metropolitan region. So that's been very encouraging, and I think anybody who opens up a newspaper would be well aware that we're not producing anywhere near enough multi-unit infill supply compared to the demand profile, and also to the historical kind of levels of output. So anything that can be done to support infill development, and if that is focused on stamp duty relief or or different sorts of concessions to help with the feasibility equation. UDIA is certainly very supportive of that. But I suppose at a more specific level, the NHP reporting, given that it was always targeted to be a helpful input for programs such as the Urban Growth Monitor that the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage release once a year, that provides a snapshot from their assessment of MRS zoned and urban and urban deferred zone lands. Industry sort of said, well, on the ground, we're looking at 4 to 6 years maximum of development ready supply, whereas the Urban Growth Monitor is talking about 25 to 27 years of supply. So unfortunately, that sort of figure doesn't take into account a lot of the assessment that we're running over the zoned and potential zoned areas in terms of those constraints, but also looking at what developers are actually able to develop within this sort of 10-year time frame. That's also missing from a UGM type platform. So when developers are providing their information about their land holdings through our NHP survey every year, they're providing us a snapshot of where enabling infrastructure and key environmental planning and building approvals are up to, and then providing an expectation of yield of dwelling type over this forward 10-year time period. So we sort of would expect to lean on that intelligence in terms of the actual supply that's going to be delivered versus a theoretical kind of calculation based on historical take-up rates and
much more realistic to get it straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. And then, so turning more to the apartment sector now, as you were talking about. So as we know, the feasibilities are very much struggling because of the costs of construction. We were talking just before this, and I was saying potentially Trump's tariffs may have a deflationary impact on some certain building materials, maybe, who knows. Do you have any kind of outlook on the costs of construction in the next, say, 12 months and how that may impact apartments specifically, because they're lagging so far behind because of that issue?
Yeah, look, it may have a positive outcome for the construction sector, these tariffs, as you say. So let's take the optimistic view that they might, and they might put downward pressure. They might put some downward pressure on pricing, input pricing into the new home building sector. Should that be the case, or even kind of can maintain the kind of the current level of pricing, because now developers have had a chance to reset their feasibility calculations at this new high cost base, and that's sort of washed through the system now, I suppose. So that there could be a bright light there. One of the positives, I suppose, of the significant house price growth that we've seen in WA over the last 18 months, 2 years, has been the sort of the equation, if you like, for making new apartment projects feasible is sort of closer than it has been in some time. So that's a positive output, making more sites potentially able to see projects commence in a shorter time frame. So with our latest forecast for a multi-unit commencement released in our State of the Land report, which is a separate national research report that we launched our National Congress in mid-March. We've got a sort of a modest uptick in commencements activity forecast in the multi-unit space, and that includes townhouse and row and terrace house products, as well as some more medium and high rise projects, which is very very pleasing to see that I guess the green shoots of that subsector having a bit more of a positive bent, because
it's off a low base.
It's off a very low base, yes. Yeah, if you look at the approvals, commencements, and completions numbers, they're at historically low levels.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think, Tim, it reflects the lack of maturity of our apartment sector in Perth. Flying into Perth, it's a pretty flat track. If you look at the nodes of density across the entire metropolitan region, just a few high rises dotted across the metro area, and mostly just in the CBD and inner areas. Whereas you fly to Sydney, of course, and you've got quite significant nodes of density right across that greater metropolitan basin.
Yeah.
So I think if we can get to a point where there's greater community acceptance and greater consumer kind of appetite for medium and high density development, that will be a key part of the puzzle too. But in a lot of locations, if a 2-bedroom apartment is costing the same as a detached home, you haven't got the arbitrage to help force the issue on that matter.
Yeah, we need the density in other locations outside of just, say, the CBD in Northbridge, Coburn or Joondalup or Midland or wherever it may be. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Toby. I appreciate it. And thanks for your time.
Absolute pleasure, Tim. Have a nice day, mate.